This is James Rosebush, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Yeah, we've been talking off mic about what the heck we're going to talk about. James is such a smart guy. He's got incredible experience. He was one of the, I don't know, I'm just going to say one of the top advisors for Reagan. And once you get to work at that kind of level, James, you just get so much experience and wisdom. And I think what's interesting between you and I is you couple that very top end of the administration experience and the machine up there, and you go all the way down to the very bottom is no guy below me on the ground. I'm acting with the Afghans. I'm talking to the Iraqis. And between us, there's not a thread of connection between how we do things, And I know it creates problems, but it's also remarkable that we can sort of work together on these things. It's interesting. We were talking about people who solve big problems. Peter Diamandis, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, even Jeff Bezos. These guys are people who try to solve big problems. What are your thoughts? You said you have hope now. What about these guys gives you hope?
Well, what I was thinking about before I answer that, dive into that, I was thinking about, because I'm a coach, obviously, of CEOs and other people who want to get their message across. So storytelling is the most important thing. So I want to tell you a story that was very interesting to me because I just happened to put two and two together. Sometimes you're thinking back in your life and you're thinking, well, why did that happen? And why is this happening? All that sort of thing. So I think for most of us, there's an illogical progression, it seems at the time, but maybe after a while, you see how things fit together, right? So follow this. So when I was 20 years old, I was invited to be a Rotary International Scholar, and I was sent to the Soviet Union. Now, when I arrived in the Soviet Union, I was deemed a threat, a security threat. So they thought that I was a spy, which as far as I know, I was not. But I warranted a team of Secret Service agents that followed me. They obviously created a dossier on me, which must have been very boring because I wasn't there on any surreptitious or shady, import, or purpose. But I was there to go and observe, and I had an opportunity to meet with the heads of all these Politburo agencies. So public housing, public transportation, public education, and these men they were all men who were 6 times my age and 6 times my girth. So, you can imagine these big old Soviet leaders, right? And this was just an astounding opportunity for me to go to Moscow and Leningrad and have these significant meetings. And then at night, I would wander the streets and people would come up to me, ordinary Soviets. I had to be careful, but they would plead with me, would you please teach me English so I could leave this place? They would tell me all these things. Well, follow this. Now, that was 2 months there when I was 20 years old. 10 years later, I find myself in the White House negotiating with the Soviets for the first bilateral meeting between Reagan and Gorbachev. Now, with our team our negotiating team with the Gorbachev team, the first round of the Gorbachev apparatchiks, they were, telling us the big lie theory. Soviet Union, best economy, best fed people, blah, 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 blah. And we knew that was the big lie theory. But interesting, no one on our team had actually ever been to the Soviet Union. 10 years before this, I had been there, seen it, felt it, tasted it by myself. So I knew what was going on. Now, certainly a part of the Reagan foreign policy team, certainly there were actors who had been to the Soviet Union before. On our negotiating team, I was the only person. So when someone tells you what they try to convey to you is a big lie theory, if you've actually seen it with your own eyes and tasted it and seen it and experienced it, know that it's something you're not going to accept. So I think storytelling, if it's truth telling and it's done I think if it's done in a colorful and meaningful way, that is reflecting on the experience that you had, it's important. So you mentioned my interest in, I would say, epic breaking ideas. So you both of us share an affection for the writing of Peter Diamandis and just his brain. So he is a person who he wrote the book Abundance. He has a theory that we have available to us the answer to every problem that we face. And so among us humans, we have the answer to everything, whether it's shortage of fish in the sea to feed civilizations that live on oceans, whether it's, carbon, whatever pick whatever your problem is, and there's an overabundance of them. We have it within us. And this is something Reagan always used to love to say, that quoting some of the early founders and patriots, that we have it in us to start the world over again. So every single person has the ability to think up an answer to what the world's problems or even a local community's problems are. And I think that's what makes an incredible dynamic, and particularly in a capitalistic economy, these things are necessary to feed our human progress and our well-being. And you see it in the example. I've just been fascinated thinking about Elon Musk because, well, okay, fine, he's the richest man in the world, but his attitude toward that is sort of, so what? Money at this point, what does money mean to him at this point? Absolutely zero. He lives in a tiny house. He lives in a 371 square foot house. So that's his, I guess he owns it. I don't know, he might rent it, but he doesn't, I believe he doesn't really care about money, because if he lost all that money, what is it, $400 billion or something like that? If he lost it, he would be a creator all over again. And I think this is one of the things we need to imbue in young people, whatever economic level, whatever educational level. Not having an education doesn't necessarily give you the skills to be creative and to address a solution. One time years ago, I started something called the School for World Problem Solvers. And I went to the United Nations and I said, I'd like you to, host this, underwrite it, would you? And they were intrigued by the idea of actually having a core of people around the world on all the different continents be part of a school for world problem solvers. So these people would be attending school, but what they would have to do to graduate is that they would have to create a solution for one of mankind's serious problems, which could be nutrition or health or, homelessness is not a problem. It's a symptom of a problem, but all of these different kinds of things. And I think that's what it gives me hope for the future. As long as people have the freedom to think for themselves and they're incentivized to want to do it, government handouts do not incentivize people to create solutions, not only to other people's problems, but to their own.
Yeah.
This is absolutely essential. So now that covers a wide swath of things there, but I always love talking to you.
Well, I know, I appreciate that. And yeah, you give us a lot of a room to play around in. And I think about one of the problems here in America, I was to be the doctor for a moment here, is we can absolutely have a state-of-the-art medical program that provides medical coverage for everybody. First off, it shouldn't be called medical insurance. Second, it shouldn't involve having a job, where, I lost my job, I lost my medical benefits. It shouldn't involve losing the ability to have a family plan, like this is a service. And then maybe you can have an insurance, like a catastrophic insurance above that or something. But because we can't all agree to give up everything we have to get a state-of-the-art program, we don't have one. We just continue to Frankenstein something together, add on a leg, stick on an arm. Hey, everybody needs more arm room. Let's put another arm on. Now we got 5 arms, and this thing gets crazy real fast. And we don't have the ability to just slow down and implement something better. Jeff Bezos could probably create a wonderful private-based healthcare system because he's really good at stuff like that, right? Bringing things to people. So how do we create these incentives with the government where we're like, hey, Jeff, can you help us out with this? Or, how do we create incentive, the carrot, as opposed to, the cookie, of like, here's free money, but how do we create enough incentive to make people inspired to solve these problems or to create art that we need or whatever it is? How do we do that without the government just getting in the way of itself?
So here are a couple of examples. So when I was in the White House, my job was to create public-private partnerships. So I brought in let's say public housing. So at that time, there were these massives. I don't know if your listeners are even aware of this, but in Chicago and St. Louis, these were, like these 24 floor towers of poverty, and they were full of road. It was terrible, disgusting, and they were all brought down. They were torn down. So I thought to myself, I want to bring in the smartest private sector developers of low cost housing that I can find. Brought them in. I said, look, we want to do public-private partnerships with you. We want to put you really in charge of designing, creating, building, and giving government can come in with subsidies, but the government can't. The government's not in the business of building. Thank heavens, not in the business of building and designing houses for people that need to be subsidized. The private sector should be doing that. So that was the beginning of that. Same thing with charter schools. Okay, kids are failing in school. The test scores, even though that we in this country we pay more per capita for kids' education than any other country, our students fare like 16th or 17th. Okay, in the world on their performance. So we started charter schools. That was a public-private partnership, and so it goes. So you have the opportunity to and I have to say at that time I met with a woman who was the head of one of the U.S. major hospitals. And I asked her, how would you really address the searing problem we have with taking care of veterans? Because that's really one of the places my heart is the most. We should be taking care of veterans, absolutely, after what they do to defend our freedoms. And she went over and got her hand, her purse. She took out her wallet, and she held a American Express Gold card in my face. She said, "This is the solution." Now, she didn't mean American Express Gold card, but she meant give the veteran an opportunity to go out and buy their own care. So get them in a competitive environment for healthcare instead of making them go to federally funded and operated veterans hospitals where they're not getting the service. So put them into a competitive marketplace. Healthcare is a field which I've done a lot of work in, and in a lot of areas, we have seen tremendous solutions to a lot of problems. I think this is going to be, you're going to see, in the next 20 years, maybe next 5 years, you're going to be see an acceleration of solutions. I mean, even the very fact that we got vaccines out as fast as we did foretells the future of addressing this. But I think, at the same time, we have to have a lot of, in addition to where, we're going with this, is a lot of self-care. People are very interested now in not depending upon, they might go to, 5 different doctors to get 5 different opinions, and there would be 5 different opinions, right? They are more interested in taking care of and being responsible for their own health care. So, for example, my daughters, with my 6 grandchildren, they take a picture. If a kid has a rash or a kid has whatever, they take a picture on their phone, send it to the pediatrician. The pediatrician texts back, what to do about it. Okay. Telemedicine is a brand new thing. We're going to see a lot more of that. Lot more of that. And we're going to see I would say which is very needed, a much broader acceptance of all different kinds of solutions, from the holistic approach in terms of nutrition, exercise, all this sort of thing, to consciousness healing, prayer, all kinds of things. I've been involved in quite a few studies where I've spent time at Duke Medical Center, Harvard, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, all these places. And I can tell you they're really pushing, NIH as well. They're pushing this whole direction, this whole movement in a much bigger direction. So I think we're going to have many more choices and much better, I think, better health and better solutions when people are really taking care, if they can. Certainly there are people who can't take care of themselves. But we're going to, I think we have to make healthcare more universally, and I mean healthcare in a big sense, available to more people.
Yeah, one of my favorite numbers is there are 5,000 medical school grads who do not, in the United States, who do not find a residency. I mean, if you wanted to create capacity and you wanted to have a federal solution that washes into the private sector, is bring those 5,000 in and start just like a national residency program, and just we would have a flood of doctors. And by the way, I find it fascinating that if you go to a doctor, specialist, generalist, whatever it is, and you say, hey, I'm paying cash, the number is always different than if you have insurance. There's just less paperwork, there's less middle people involved, and you just get to it what you want. And I encourage anybody to look into this new service, like service-based doctors who do what they call it concierge, but just think of it as like you're paying a subscription for a service and it's access to a doctor. And they say things like, send me a picture of your rash, come in if you've got a cut on your eye, if you need a specialist, I've got a network of specialists, whatever. And there are people leaving the big national system because it doesn't provide. And I think the same thing with education too. It's hard for a major university to charge $30,000, $45,000, $50,000 a year and then teach a bulk of its classes online. And the same thing with public schools. The charter schools and school choice are an important thing, because there should be competition to improve schools. It should never be, the kids should always be first, and then maybe the parents, and then maybe the unions and but we don't seem to have that. So I think also the internet is creating opportunities for entrepreneurs to create better schools. And then what's even possible right now, like 20 years from now, big school institutions may be struggling to stay relevant. And we just saw that in an election in Virginia where parents were rejecting they were rejecting being ignored and their kids being taught something that they weren't comfortable with.
Well, there's a big difference between indoctrination and education. Is it an educator's job to indoctrinate kids with their points of view? I don't think so. I think that it's a parent's responsibility to provide moral education. So, but here's the thing, education has to be, I think one of the great things that COVID has done is it's ripped open these sores. And one big one is education has to be 1000% completely torn apart and rethought. It's a ridiculous idea. Of course, we talk about this. It's a factory model, right? That was started, the turn of the, in the early 1900s when people, they were coming off farms and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Do two kids ever learn the same way? Are they ever at the same level? Are they ever do they ever have the same interest? There should be individualized instruction plan where you can progress as fast as you want.
Yeah.
Why is it just because you're a certain age, you have to progress from first grade to second grade? When I was in elementary school, there was an experiment that fortunately I was a part of where they combined first grade with third grade. So when I was in the first grade, I was put together with third graders, and they found that basically we didn't need second grade. It was like, what do you call daycare? You were kind of being taken care of. Why did you need the second grade? And they didn't change the elementary school pattern, but I think that they probably should have. So to me, it has to be completely rethought. And the idea of higher education, well, when we had truly a liberal education where people were going to undergraduate school and learning literature, world literature and world history and all this sort of thing, that is very useful. I think knowing just about World War I, why it started and what the effect of World War I we're still feeling. We live in a world that's largely affected by World War I. People don't, majority of kids don't even know what World War I was. Yeah. Well, these are all important things. But, I think there's a lot to say I've studied the French, Italian, Irish, and British and German educational systems. Most of them are skills focused. This is in secondary education. So you have students, they have to decide at a certain time, they can say it's arbitrary, whether they're going to become skilled workers or whether they're going to become lawyers and, they're going to go on to college or higher education. Well, when they graduate basically from high school, they got a job. because they're plumbers or bricklayers or plasterers or painters or, whatever. They have a skill. In this country, what does a kid have when they graduate from the 12th grade?
More work to do.
Yeah, they have no skills. They have no skills. So,
Right.
to me, this is, I've been involved in starting 4 schools. I think, we need a complete rethink on what education is and why. I see, again, use my own grandchildren as an example. Each one of them, 6 kids, they're totally unique and they respond to different stimulus. One of the kids who's 4.5 years old right now could be, he's so advanced in terms of his analytical thinking process. He can hold a conversation with an adult. So why shouldn't he get more stimulus? I'm not saying he's socially,
Right.
He's not a physically an adult, but whereas some of the others, maybe they have different kinds of skills and insights. But we need to have education that is customized for the individual.
That's sure the way the medicine is going, right? I mean, part of this RNA vaccination program and all the different stuff with determining your specific brand of the cure of whatever it is that you're dealing with, that's happening. And certainly in education, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I'm curious what your thoughts are, we've come a long way. I mean, a really long way. I'm reading a book about a slave trader from the late 1800s, early 1900s. And it's 100 years. And there's people that I'm not alive from his time anymore. No one's alive from 1907 when he died, but there's people from 20 years later that are still alive, right? And that's how recent this is. And we've just come so far in terms of ethnicity and equal application of the law and everything. We seem desperate to go backwards, but I don't know that. I think that horse left the barn. We're going to complain about it and we're going to try to figure these things out. But how important is ethnicity and class in solutions at the federal level if we're going to try to deal with these things? You can look sociologically at numbers and it's really hard to find racism being a problem. And yet colloquially, we can go into communities and we absolutely see its impact. It may not be found in big numbers, but you can find it at the ground level.
Well, I think that is why people they've been labeled and they have been used by people who want to assert labels on them.
Yeah.
Now, my view of mankind is that we are all created by one creator and we are all brothers and sisters. We're all the same. It doesn't matter what language you speak or the color of your skin or your upbringing or your traditions. Why do people have to be identified by color, ethnicity, political view, whatever it is? We are all related. We're all human beings. We're all brothers and sisters. And the sooner we come to that realization, the more unity and peace and I think progress that we're going to have. I think the idea of separating people by race and class is an extremely destructive thing to do, because and people I believe that people, and believe me, I think it's interesting to be proud of your ethnic background or your history, family history, or be it positive or not positive. I think it's interesting to me to meet people with different backgrounds, but I don't believe that they're any different than I am. And I don't believe that they're any different or I am any different than they are. And we need to feel a unity of spirit that not only embraces us, but pulls us together, because that's when we're really going to make progress. It's when people insist in being different or being in a specific category because of different things. My family came to America when my great grandfather's generation, my particular family, they came through Canada into the Midwest. Different families came in different ways. Different families did not come in good ways. They were brought here. Okay, Fine, I get that, but I believe that there should be, we always talk about that we need more love in the world. We need more connection. We need a feeling of brotherhood and sisterhood. And I think that that can only come by I'm not saying sameness, but I'm saying a basic recognition that we're all human beings. We're related. We're a part of the class of living animals that are called humans. And the more productive way to live is on that basis, not on our differences, but on our similarities. We all have hearts. We all have minds. We all have the ability to think, to love, to have compassion, to take care of each other. Those are all the things that we have in common. And to me, those are the things that we should be stressing.
When I go out on the road, that's one of the things I like to look for is like this brotherhood of man idea, and how similar are we? No, granted, look, people who want to live in the most ruralist part of rural Texas are not going to identify with people that love the vibrance of New York City. And then everything in between, right? You have folks that want to be small town folks that want to be bigger town folks, and they're not going to agree on a lot of things. But if we can manage to tolerate one another's ability to do what we individually want to do, all caveats apply. You're not going to hurt anybody else doing it, but we get a lot better. What is it about tolerance that makes it so hard? I mean, like if you bring up tolerance to somebody who's intolerant, they tell you how tolerant they are, except for, and then they start making a list of things, and then everybody falls into those things that they don't like. So I don't tolerate Nazis. Okay, well, there are no Nazis anymore. So what does that mean? You've rejiggered what Nazis are and trying to assign that to people. But if you go out and just talk to people, if I was to go talk to you in your neighborhood or 15 other people from 15 other neighborhoods in your region, and I just met them at their level, I bet I'd find 15 to 16 really good people out of those 15 to 16 people I met.
Well, I think you have to give people a chance, and I think you have to be curious and open-minded. So interesting you should mention West Texas, because my wife and I were there last weekend. We went to Marfa. You know what Marfa is?
I know exactly where Marfa is. Yeah.
Okay. So Marfa, incredibly cool place. We had to fly through Dallas and El Paso and drive 3 hours. So it's right on the border. We actually passed through a border patrol, which was fascinating. We saw this massive drone that has, cameras that are like 200 miles. They can spot people coming across the border illegally. But we were there because of the art installations in Marfa. So Marfa is a rough kind of, was sort of a redneck town, still is largely, but it's been, artists are attracted to go there because Donald Judd, who's a major artist, installed some absolutely phenomenal things there, right? Well, okay. Now, I'm not going to move to Marfa, but I like doing things that expand my mind and open me to different points of view, different scenery. I mean, the night sky there is beyond, that you can see a million stars at night. We slept in a Airstream trailer. I was thrilled about that. I like to experience things that other people have experienced, and I like people, so I'm interested in their story. I'm interested in collecting stories. I'm not interested in judging them unless they're violent or they're full of hate, or So generally, I'm not interested in hanging out with people like that. But I found these people really fascinating. They wouldn't necessarily live the way I live. So what? I think it's interesting. I learned from them. And we had been the week before, we went to Crystal Bridges, which is another phenomenal museum that is in Bentonville, headquarters of Walmart. I would have thought, well, what, you're going to go to the headquarters town of Walmart? How interesting. And this museum was built and full of art paid for by one of the, Walmart daughters, and they criticized her, well, how you're buying all this art and you're building this museum, and how can you do this? Well, guess what? They've had 2 million visitors. She's doing it to expose people in the lower Midwest to art, because there aren't any museums down there. So why shouldn't she do that? I think it's a great thing that she did for mankind. So going down, I tell you, we were really surprised. Going down to this little town of Bentonville, it's like you've gone back to Mayberry. There's a town square. I don't know whether you've been there or not. And
Not
I
been
tell you, and
Yeah.
so we pulled up, and I said to the guy at the hotel, do you park the car, or should I put it in a garage, or what? The rental car. He's like, well, you can park on any street that you want to in Bentonville. So I pulled a block away. I pulled the rental car into. I couldn't find a sign, a park mobile, a meter, anything that said to me, if you park here for more than 2 minutes, you're going to be fine. So
Right.
I parked there, and there was a guy who parked behind me, and I could tell he was a resident of Bentonville. And I said, can I really park here? I mean, I can't find a sign. I can't find a meter to put money in. Am I going to get a ticket? He said, a ticket? Oh, you can park on any street in Bentonville. No one's going to give you a ticket. I thought, I'm going to move to Bentonville.
Yeah.
Okay, now that's an example of a very different environment than I'm used to or that I live in. Well, I feel like it opens my mind.
It does. It does. And you're right about that Texas sky. On my Medium account last summer, I wrote a thing. I just slept. I had an Airbnb, but the first night I'm like, I'm sleeping in the back of my pickup and just looking at the sky because there it is. I mean, that's the story right there. And I wrote a whole thing about
Unbelievable.
it. Yeah, it is unbelievable. And when you go out and experience these things, people where they're at, you can start to understand that, like, before I start assigning any kind of belief to anybody, especially based upon what I perceive their ethnicity to be, boy, I'd better get to know some more people first, because it's a little bit crazy to do that. I'm curious. So I just right before we did this, I finished writing up a thing on there's a guy named Edward. Maybe you know him, Edward N. Litvak. He's an older guy who's written about international security for quite a while, and he responded to in the Wall Street Journal. He responded to a thing written by H.R. McMaster last week on Veterans Day and combat stuff. So I had to weigh in as the guy that does stuff on the ground. And it just was shocking to me to hear Litvak talk about how the CIA needs to be able to go in and blend in places like Afghanistan and find the enemy. And like, what decade are you living in? We just don't live in this decade anymore. It seems to me, James, and I struggle with this. I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm not an isolationist, but we're so bad at preparing ourselves to go abroad to fight the fight that's there that I'm not sure that we've earned the right to go out to anybody else's country to try to bring any kind of help.
Well, two things on that. First of all, I think Americans have always been very bad. And if you look at the Yalta Treaty after World War II, for example, which was a complete failure on the Americans' part. Look what Poland even today struggles. I mean, my heart goes out to Poland. I mean, they've just been the brunt of, though their fighters, really saved England in World War II. What happened? Poland gets annexed. They get run over by the Soviets. I mean, it's just a mess. But I think that Americans have always been extremely bad at putting enough time into understanding other political economies and cultures. So we're not very good at, we think, okay, because we've been fed with, America's the best, blah, blah, blah. And which I believe that our system is the best. I don't think Americans are superior to other people, but I believe that our government system is. But to go into other countries and not really devote a serious amount of time to understand where they're coming from, their culture, why are they this way? Why are they making decisions the way they do? A lot of times I believe that American intelligence operations go in, whether they are covert or not, but they'll go in on an operation and they'll just take an American attitude toward interpreting what's happening on the part of the country where they are. So I think they can be very short-sighted. On the other hand, I think it's critically important to view foreign policy, and particularly defense, as protecting our own country. I believe that the reason that we should be active globally is to protect our interests in our own homeland. Because if we're not, and you can certainly, it's easy, obviously, to look at China this way, but they're not the only threat. To see that we need to understand why it is the Chinese want global domination, which is no secret. They've written and published it and given it to all of us to read. So it's right out there. Why is it? We need to understand why they want to restore what they consider much earlier dominance in the world of the East versus the West. Why that is. We need to understand why it is we need to protect our interests way into the future. And we need to understand these other cultures and either how we can have positive coexistence with them, trade, all of these different things, or we need to understand how it is that we're going to protect the American people. And I believe that in many instances, we're very short-sighted about that. We lack the historic knowledge. I can't imagine anyone serving in the foreign policy apparatus today that does not understand the actions of and the consequences of not just World War I, Korean War, World War II, but other conflicts that we've had. And I don't begin to say that I understand all the ramifications of it, but I'm a student enough of it to be amazed when I read more of the details. For example, recently, as I had of the Yalta Convention, and when you read this, you get, and I think you have to read widely about it and not just absorb one person's point of view. But when you read this stuff, you begin to see, well, failures were made here, failures were made there, and what history is nothing but the ability to pave a better future. So, Churchill said, the farther you can look back, the further you can go into the future. And this is something I really believe in. And Churchill was a massive student of history. I mean, he wrote books about history. So he had to understand it. He wrote like 32 books, no, more than that, more than 30 books. So he had to really figure out what these different conflicts were, especially for the British Empire, in order to be able to make a good judgment going forward. I think this is something that probably the American culture has always lacked, because we're a new country. We're not an ancient one. And we think, we have all the ideas and we have the good ideas. Well, we do have a lot of good ideas. But I think when it comes to our relationship with other countries around the globe, you would think by this time, wouldn't you, that we would have more agreement, we would have more and more productive associations with more countries. Today, I see more countries in conflict than ever before.
Yeah, conflict seems to be on the rise. I guess that's always fun to say that, but it does seem that like Central and South America are destabilizing. And even if not, again, and I don't mean this to be a political thing, but if we have an open border, very permissive immigration program that we can't ourselves manage, right? And having people roaming freely in the middle of the nation without any kind of documentation is not managing it. If we're brain draining and entrepreneurial draining Guatemala and all these other places, we're just moving people on credit that we're going to have to do something at some point about these destabilized nations that don't have the best people that they have. The go-getters are all going to leave. They're going to go and they're going to go somewhere else. And these problems don't stop. Another thing I want to say too is you're so right about history. We're both students of history, and the more we learn how hard it is to synthesize multiple eras or multiple time. Like you can put a bunch of different people in a historical context era, right? Like Wyatt Earp, a guy from the 10th Cav down there in that area, right? And all these different people, or Geronimo, are all there at the same time, all completely different realities. And they may never have met each other, but they were all within 200 miles of each other,
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating. And that's just that one region. And you can look around and it's very, very, very complex. Yalta, like you said, depends on which book you read. I'm reading a book right now about a biography in a series of biographies I'm reading about Robert E. Lee, because I'm not going to be told that he's a bad guy. And what I've come up with thus far is that you can't remove the stain of history off of him. But his first decision, the decision he would have made over and over again, was based because he had a resolute character. And that character was great until he had made a decision that ultimately led him on a path where he has this unmovable historical stain.
I think Lee was a great man allied with the wrong cause.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I think, especially living in Washington and having a lot of friends in Virginia, and many steeped in the history of Virginia, Lee and the Lee family, they were leaders. They added to the development of the South and Virginia and so forth. But he was a person who was caught on the wrong side. But everyone had very high regard,
right,
at the time. Now certain people have decided, it's different. I mean, I can't say that I disagree with, you have to say, well, why throughout the South do we have, in the South in particular, why do we have all of these memorials to the people who fought for the part of the country that lost? It seems a little strange now within the context of today, but there's a good example. So I'm not from the South, but I've spent time in the South, and I've had relatives from the South. And you go to the South even today, and you find plenty of people who say that the South won, or that the South should have won, or even today people will talk about that. Now I think it's going out, but that is not a surprising thing to hear. So I think going back into history and really understanding, it's people, and I agree with you. I don't want to be controlled by anyone or any one book or any one point of view. I want to read enough until I gather my own point of view, and I don't want to be controlled by anyone. So I don't want anyone to tell me that this is the truth until I've thoroughly examined it to the extent that I can myself. And I would think that in this country, we have the ability to do that to the extent that we can get the knowledge, we can obtain the facts to the extent that we can. I think that is what true education really is to me. It's not accepting what someone tells you or the way they tell you to think or to act. It's for you to decide yourself after you've made your own determination. And the Yalta book that I just finished, which I think you would enjoy because it's a slightly different take on it, it's called The Daughters of Yalta. And this is the story of the daughters of Churchill, of Roosevelt, and the U.S. ambassador to Russia at the time. And these three young women went with their fathers to Yalta, and it's seeing Yalta through their lens, and it's really interesting. But it builds dramatically because Stalin insisted on having this meeting in this ridiculously isolated, broken down place, and it really contributed to Roosevelt's demise. His health contributed to his death shortly after that. But 10 days after the Yalta agreement was signed, it was declared a complete disaster. So all that money, all that effort, and all that good health was expended by people who were basically controlled by Stalin, because after they all had these agreements, Stalin just went ahead and did whatever he wanted to do, and he didn't abide by them at all. And I think that's you talk about understanding different cultures. When I had to negotiate with the Chinese, for example, you had to understand why, and it was an enormous learning lesson for me. Every time I was negotiating with the Chinese, I would never get either acceptance to the U.S. proposals, or I would never get a clear answer. And that's because culturally, they can't look you in the face and give you an answer, especially if it's a no, or even if it's a yes. Well, that's something that as an American negotiator, you have to learn and you have to understand how it is you can negotiate successfully with people who approach the whole field of communication differently. And I discussed this in my current book called Winning Your Audience, that then this is a critical thing to recognize, and most of us don't. Most of what we say is not heard the way we think it's being heard by the person who's listening. So even as good a friend as you and I are, friends as you and I are, the things that I'm saying are going through your sieve of your mind. You're interpreting what I'm saying from the context of your life and your education and your point of view. And we take that into consideration. For example, when we're giving speeches, or we're just having a conversation with our kids, or it could be anyone. We don't take into consideration the fact that we think that what we're saying is what they're hearing. Guess what?
It's not.
No.
While you were saying all of that, I was putting up the link to your book, and we plugged the book. But your latest book is called "Winning Your Audience: Deliver a Message with the Confidence of a President." And so, as you were saying that, yes, I was listening to what you're saying. It's a good example. Like, your brain clocks on different things at different times, and you're 100% right. As a podcast consultant, I tell people it's okay to slow down. It's okay to say it again. It's okay to change time and go, wait, say that again, because that might grab the audience's attention. I'm aware of it. You're aware of it because you've negotiated and said things to people. I remember I was in Afghanistan, and I was talking to this partner from Afghanistan, and I know, look, I'm way ahead of my peers because I'd been there. I'd done it so much. I knew what to do, and I'm focusing just on trust, not on getting anything done at all. Just trust, trust, trust. And I thought I had it. And then I realized one day that I hadn't finished testing for trust. I didn't have the trust I thought I had. I'd overplayed. And this is me years into the game. And I'm like, man, I made such a back to basics mistake. And so I didn't have the trust that I thought I had. Then when I got it, it's just like, oh, you could see it. He was talking about me in a different regard. He was introducing me to his friends. I now had real trust with this person, and it changed everything. So not only what they perceive, but your perception of how they perceive it impacts your ability to send that message. Like, if it was important for me to slow down and get trust, I might have gotten it a week or 2 or 3 weeks earlier. Maybe it wouldn't have made that much difference operationally, but the fact that I made such a simple mistake, well, how many other unknown mistakes did I make too? Because life is, I know when I look back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got all these things so wrong. I might have believed them passionately, but it doesn't mean that I was right. And you're right. I want to go back a little bit though. I want to ask you a question about education again, because we're trying to redefine what we want to teach our kids, right? And I'm all about teaching kids history. I mean, we have this perception that when you went to high school, we didn't learn about slavery, or we were like, oh, it was great, black people loved it or something. I mean, I don't know what people think, but we have this perception that we're not teaching it. And I go back to my high school every year and I talk to the kids there. And let me just tell you, I mean, I'm an easy day, right? Like, here's Pete telling you about what your history or what your future could be like. And the vast majority of the kids are completely unengaged. Maybe they're listening, maybe they're not. I have no way to tell because they don't let me know. And that's fine, right? But to think that we're going to change the curriculum in some way, and that's suddenly going to inform a bunch of high school kids in a way that they aren't already. And then what are you going to give up curriculum wise? We have these perceptions of what we're able to communicate, but the people that do it, do you think, James, that they're history teachers that are like, gosh, I wish I had something to teach second semester. I just don't have a single thing because we're not going to teach history. It's like, and I think they're more thinking, how in the hell am I going to get these kids to learn that this is just the beginning? I mean, you and I are still reading books about history to process it better and still opening our eyes to things. We still both admit I know nothing, because you can't know it all in history. So what are your thoughts? Like, I mean, yes, we need to tear the educational system down and do a better job of serving these kids so they can be a better version of us in the future. But how do you get kids to care about their education enough to actually want to pursue that?
I'll tell you, when I speak, people often say to me, because I give a lot of speeches, so people are like, what is your scariest audience? Guess what? high schoolers.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding you. I remember speaking not too long ago in Cleveland in front of a big, huge public, county-wide high school, right? Like
Yeah.
it was a massive auditorium, huge auditorium, right? And I was up on stage and I was probably talking about something boring like leadership or something like that.
Yeah.
And I just really, because a million things can go, as you know, as a public speaker, when you're speaking, a million things can still go in your mind. You have your brain functions with several motors going at the same time. And people are like, really? Yes. I said, you can be giving a foreign policy speech and you're going to be thinking, gee, I wish I want eggs for dinner tonight. Your mind has several different rotors going on at the same time. So I'm standing there looking at these kids. They were on their phones. They were sleeping. Their feet were up on the seat next to them. They were like, they could not. I thought this is a waste of their time, and I was just demoralized. So after the talk, I went down, in front of the stage. All of them, they fled out of there as fast as they could. Believe me. And so I was talking, so that the principal was thanking me, whatever, for being there and giving this talk. And I noticed, Pete, over kind of a little ways away where I was talking with the principal, there was a group of kids, and they were like, they were just like talking, and I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know. But I noticed them. Pretty soon, they slowly walked over to where I was talking with the principal. And this is maybe 20 kids out of, oh gosh, 800 or 900 kids.
Yeah.
And these kids came over to me and they said, what you said today changed our lives.
Good.
We want to thank you so much. And that was an important lesson to me. Of course, I was moved by that. And I thought, you may not reach 800, but if you reach 20, and if I reach those 20, I probably reach some others who had to go on to a class or something like that. Even if you reach one person, one of my big things when in my coaching practice on public speaking is that the first thing you have to learn is that 75% of all communication is nonverbal. It's what's in your heart, your consciousness, and your thought that conveys itself to the other consciousnesses in the auditorium. And you can convey a message without ever opening your mouth. And this is the real skill that we want to develop as public speakers. We want to reach people in the heart, in the mind, and we want to be able to, if it's worth giving a speech, then it's worth conveying a particular message. And I say, yes, I coach people on how to become the best public speakers, but I put myself in a position of being threatened all the time because I have to stand up in front of audiences and I have to make it work myself. And it's not an easy thing to do. But I think that whole idea of what you're talking about, how do you educate people, going back to the idea of being in a classroom, I think it's, certainly in high school, for example, I think it's one of the biggest challenges you can have, particularly today when high school students are absolutely magnetized by social media. And that's where they get all of that. They don't read books. They read them on their devices. They do their homework on devices. They read books on their devices. Their social life is on devices. It's all oriented to that. But the deeper question is, when I've been involved in education, running a couple of schools, starting a couple of schools, what I have tried to do is to engage the Socratic method,
Okay.
which is not to tell an answer, but to ask a question. And I think that is a way that kids really respond because it makes them think. just like, you ask me and other guests that you have on your podcast, you're in the business of asking questions. And that to me is the most wonderful and fulfilling thing that you can do. So I've had opportunities to coach teenagers, for example, and I've found that one in particular, this kid wanted to be a terrorist. He told me, I want to grow up and I want to be a terrorist. And he named people that he was patterning his life up. And he was not just playing with me. He was serious. And I thought, what am I going to do with this kid? I mean, I was tutoring him. I was coaching him. What am I going to do with this kid? Finally, what I did on every session, I simply asked him questions. I didn't tell him about life or that's bad or, whatever. No, I didn't make any judgments on him, but I asked him questions. And by asking the questions, he came up with some of the most brilliant answers I've ever read in my life. And as a result, after a year of working with him, he turned his life completely around. He went to a private school. He ended up going to college and becoming a school teacher. He ended up having a productive life. Now, you can say, in all honesty, I can say, I didn't change his life. He changed his own life. That is the secret of education. It's asking the questions. And the student, you could ask a question. What was the result of the Yalta agreement? Okay, they have to go find the answer. I think that's a much more effective way than to say the result of the Yalta conference was blah, 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 blah. Okay. Right. I believe discovery is the way of education.
It's a really good AP class out here by Pepperdine. The teacher teaches 3 different versions of the same era of history from 3 different books. So it's like, Howard Zinn, it's the standard classic history of US from whatever, and then a third alternate version of history. And these are AP students, but then they're forced to compare and contrast and determine what they think happened. And it doesn't, because you can't look at Zinn and say, oh, he's right because he's, picking the people side. And you can't say that the classic edition is right because it's been around forever. But when you go through that and you realize just how complex these things are and how oftentimes history flips on the slightest thing.
Yep.
I mean, just something simple like Patton dying post World War II in a car accident. What happens if he survives? Who knows? What happens if he takes a nap the day he slaps that soldier in Italy, and instead of slapping somebody or whatever, right? You just never know. I don't know why I use Patton as an example, but there are just all these things. How close did Franz Ferdinand come to surviving that whole debacle in Sarajevo? If he survived, what world would we live in today?
Oh, think about it.
So crazy.
Oh my gosh.
And you know how crazy that whole thing was. It just barely happened. And it took a circus of errors and improbabilities.
Well, think of this. What if Queen Victoria hadn't had so many children?
Oh boy.
It was her children that were ruling these countries that were at war with each other.
Yeah.
Okay. Or what if she had been a better mother? Or what if, that's what I think about, because Queen Victoria was the one who populated all these, the ruling houses of all these countries, most of them.
Well, listen, I don't want to keep you more than an hour. I mean, this is just great here already talking about this. We didn't really get into Afghanistan at all. And that, unfortunately, is all of a sudden old news, even though it's still a catastrophe. There's still Americans trapped there. Any thoughts on Afghanistan before we get all the way out of here?
Yes. There's one huge mistake. They kept calling it the end of the Afghan war. This was not a war. This was not a war. This was a preemptive policy to protect American interests in other places in the world. And the idea that you would judge it, oh, well, we lost, so many people, we spent so much money on the Afghan war, blah, 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 blah. That's a complete misapprehension and calling it what it was not. That is not the way you conduct a war. And we weren't there. Also, we weren't there to fight the Afghan people or to hurt the Afghan people. We were trying to sustain a logical governance in the country so that we could keep the Taliban and other questionable interests there from migrating their terror to the rest of the world. That's what it was about. And so I think that, whether it was propaganda or whatever it was, I think it was completely miscalled and misjudged from that standpoint. But when you think of, one of the things, and I just end with this, is most offensive to me, is that when the government spends all this money, trillions of dollars, when you think of all the war material we left on the streets of Afghanistan, billions of dollars of planes and jeeps and all this kind of stuff, that's my money. And it offends me. It offends me in every day when politicians say we're spending government money. There's no such thing as government money. We're spending the workers' money. And I would love to lead a revolt in that. If I were elected to Congress, and I never would be, but if I were, I would hope that I would say, thank you, taxpayers. We decided to spend some of your money doing the following things. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, I'll end my soapbox that way.
Okay, well, let me throw a soapbox in, and this is more funny. I realized the other day that we need to change the narrative on fossil fuels and call it plant-based energy, because ultimately that's what it is primarily, right? It's dead plants and stuff.
Yeah.
But the narrative is fossil fuels. Like, well, I mean, it's not really dinosaurs. We know that now. I mean, come on. But a pathway from plant-based energy to nuclear, aka scientific-based energy, is a good platform for us if you want to be clean, as opposed to putting up miles and miles of reflectors and windmills that provide some electricity, but try to keep your house warm with a windmill. It ain't gonna happen.
Oh no, and that is just not a productive way. But there are, I'm a big hydropower person.
Sure.
There are ways to harness what God has given us. Waves can be harnessed. There are other things that can be harnessed. Yeah. So I think there are a lot of different solutions out there, but putting up windmills, no.
Yeah. All right, let me run this thing. Stand by. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for